Hi everyone, Sweatband here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Clarence Clarity album, Think Peace. This is the newest full-length album from singer, songwriter, super producer Clarence Clarity, a London native who blew my mind several years ago at the release of his debut full-length album, Know Now. I listened to a bunch of various debut albums throughout the year just to check out what's new, what's interesting, and rarely does a first album put me in a position where it's like, I'm hitting the emergency brake. I'm hitting the emergency escape pod. I'm hitting the fire alarm for good measure. Because Know Now is not only a really impressive first record, but also a very inventive and mind-bending take on modern pop music and R&B, especially pop and R&B from the 2000s. This thing is experimental, it's futuristic, it sounds like he's taking ideas from Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Justin Timberlake, the boy band era of that decade, glitching them out, warping them, layering them maximally. I mean, while Know Now is not a concept album, it is such a goddamn statement. I cannot really think of any other albums this decade that sound like it. It's special. And Clarence Clarity is special. But this album is also a lot to take in. But Know Now slowly gained a bit of a cult following online. Also, the production Clarence has done for pop singer Rina Sawayama over the past few years has certainly turned a lot of heads toward him too. And since the release of Know Now, he's been randomly dropping singles here and there for this new album. Tracks like NAYSAYER, Godslayer, Fold'em, VAPID Feels, and more. Most of all these tracks end up on this new album. Some of the cuts Clarence has seen fit to release before this record came out over a year ago though. So I feel like my listening to this new album is almost like me recontextualizing these tracks I've been familiar with for a while, fitting them into this record, and just trying to get a clearer picture of who exactly Clarence Clarity is as an artist now that I have another record to dive into. Because with a debut album as long and as experimental and as versatile as Know Now, there's no telling where any of this could go next. And after multiple listens of Think Peace, there are several things I can definitively say about this record. One, it's not a huge stylistic change of pace from Know Now, so if you were looking forward to seeing Clarence kind of stick to his guns, whatever those weird-ass guns are, then you should be happy. On Think Peace, Clarence is still sounding pretty poppy, odd, kind of futuristic, but also kind of nostalgic. This is also a much shorter and a much more accessible album too. I wouldn't call a 39-minute album short or scant or anything, but I don't know, there's just something about this album that feels so much more like a breeze or a walk in the park in comparison with the very dense and massive Know Now. Especially since I think a lot of the tracks on this album are easier to take in, easier to make heads or tails of, and I think that has a lot to do with Clarence actively reeling the instrumentation in a bit on this album. The layering is not nearly as insane. Which, yes, I did really enjoy about the last album, but simultaneously it was probably turning a lot of potential listeners off. So while maybe the overall sound of Think Peace isn't as overwhelming and eargasmic, some of the tracks I think are a bit catchier for the change. And it's interesting to hear Clarence actively make this adjustment on Think Peace, because prior he was an artist who was just doing too much, trying to do everything in the world. And now he's just toning it down a little bit to achieve some more accessible results, which for the most part are still pretty creative and off the wall. Because even in this toned down state, Clarence is still a pretty unique voice in pop music, with his quivering vocal harmonies and funky alien instrumental palettes, also loads of psychedelic effects and edits, weird sonic and instrumental transitions between songs, within songs, which are not exploited to the degree that they were on Know Now, but they're still here. The highlights on this album for me kick off with the track We Change, which sounds like a fusion between a futuristic pop banger about love and the opening music to a Halloween-themed kids cartoon. Clarence incorporates all these freaky, kind of frightening synth patches, monstrous pitched vocal harmonies, and a post-hook instrumental passage with these heavy, dark synth bass notes, bum, 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 really giving me goosebumps. Literally, it sounds like something out of the show Goosebumps. The song at the core of this track is still pretty sad, as it seems to be Clarence reflecting on a love that is doomed to fail, because while he might be interested in this person, or she might be interested in him, her mind or he could change and then the love would be over. And it's like the fear of that is being translated into this spooky, weird instrumental style that is still pretty colorful and off the wall. As I said earlier, the song NAYSAYER arrives back on this record. I loved it when it came out, still think it's great now. Once again on this song, Clarence is straddling both the future and the past in this one instrumental, with more beautiful, quivering, strange vocal leads and harmonies, and a killer groove that sounds like the 80s, but it's loaded with things that never could have existed in the 80s. It's like nothing but neon pinks and headbands, hairspray and sweat and tight workout gear, but it's all happening on the deep web. Now, Clarence has kind of altered this track in its current form on the album in that he's transitioned it into another song, MAGICK Obeyer. Now it's not just one track, it's a two-part song. This portion of the track features some soaring synth solos, an undeniable bass line. I love the glitchy transition in between these two moments too. Clarence keeps throwing it back to the 80s on this record with Vapid Feels Ain't Vapid, a track that features a fun, fast, rigid, robotic but funky bass line. And I love how these moments on the song melt into these beautiful, drippy, syrupy choruses. There's kind of a change of narrative on the song
Next Best Thing,
which reads like a statement of Clarence's creative intent fed through a narrative lens of love, as he is singing about not just being the next big thing or the next best thing, but the best thing. And I think he could in fact be if he keeps busting out infectiously catchy tracks like these. I also love how the song ends with Clarence singing about how if he can't be the best, then he'll be dead, but he cuts the word dead off, and mid-word, the song's just over. Now, unfortunately, I think this record kind of trails off past the halfway point. I don't hate the track Fold 'em with Shaddy, but I feel like this song was a somewhat awkward but admirable first overt attempt at trying to incorporate hip-hop into his usual style. And not only have I not warmed up to the song all that much, but the track feels kind of out of place amongst all these songs that are super poppy, take on somewhat of an 80s throwback vibe. The over-the-top rapping doesn't make its inclusion into the album go over any smoother. And this is another song that suddenly has become a two-parter on the record too, although its second half is, I don't know, just a mere ambient-ish outro that doesn't really stick out to me as a highlight on the record. If Clarence wanted to pop a track like this into the record where he's doing more of a hip-hop thing, I don't know why it wouldn't be Rafters, which was a single he came out with recently, featuring AJ Crew, and again, a track produced in Clarence's usual style, a bit smoother, a bit poppier, and obviously a hip-hop edge to it. Kind of seems like it would have been a lot more harmonious on this new album. On top of that, there are some mellower spots on the second half here that don't really hit quite as hard. Not just because they're more subtle, but because maybe the ballad, the melody, the songwriting isn't quite as captivating. Namely the closing track, 2016, which seems more like a motif than anything. Though I do appreciate what I think Clarence is trying to do on this song in making a statement on just how awful of a year 2016 panned out to be, and the effects it's continuing to have on the world at large. Singing over and over on the track, "In time, we'll learn." But yeah, I thought Law of Fives was an okay ballad. Meanwhile, True Love is so easygoing and incredibly lacking in anything all that quirky or eccentric about it. It just feels like Clarence is emulating some really bland pop music rather than experimenting with it. Overall, I thought Think Peace was a pretty good listen. It feels almost like a simplified, abridged version of No Now. Slightly plainer, slightly more straightforward, but also, in my opinion, slightly less interesting. However, among fans, it does seem to be pretty well received, as it should be, because there are a lot of good tracks on here. And with many of the songs on this album being pretty digestible in their delivery, I think this record might have a greater chance of carrying over to some new fans, even if I don't find it to be as satisfying and bold. But honestly, I think my issues with the record could have been easily overcome with some stronger, more powerful ballads and shows of instrumentation in the second leg. Because while I'm not super crazy about the change of pace that Clarence brought on this record, I think its biggest issue is that it does not end as strong as it starts. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this album. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Clarence Clarity, think peace forever.